the hell am I looking at?
You're looking at the creation of Police Quest 4, a new state-of-the-art crime-solving computer game from Sierra Online. And yes, that is retired Los Angeles Police Chief Daryl Gates.
He's a gentleman, and he certainly has added realism and thoughtfulness and accuracy to this game.
Who's that finger?
This is an alert from Central Dispatch. Major disturbance reported. This is a level 1 emergency. Hospital emergency rooms are standing by.
I am the Space Quest historian. I guess I can't put this off any longer. It's finally time to check in on the fourth and final game in the Police Quest series. Well, the final adventure game in the series. Well, let's just get this out of the way. Yes, this is the infamous one. Jim Walls, retired highway patrolman and designer of the previous 3 Police Quest games, left Sierra right after production of the 3rd game wrapped, and Sierra brought in a new police dude to be the new face of this one. But their choice was, let's just say, a bit on the controversial side. Now, I'm not going to go into excruciating detail about this whole thing, because Lord knows plenty has already been said and written about this questionable move on Sierra's part. Daryl Gates is, shall we say, a divisive figure? I mean, while he had a pretty illustrious career as a law enforcement officer, working on such high-profile cases as the Manson family murders and the Hillside Strangler case, his most notable and notorious achievement was inadvertently inciting the Los Angeles riots of 1992, just 1 year prior to this game's release. Look it up at your own peril, but let's just say, if even The Offspring writes a song about how badly you fucked up, you know you fucked up hard. Yeah, that song hasn't aged well, but you get my drift. Anyway, it bears mentioning that Police Quest 4 wasn't actually designed by Chief Gates. As far as I can gather, he didn't even come up with the story or any of the characters. For all intents and purposes, he was just a figurehead who was hired to give the game some credibility. Whatever amount of credibility he had to offer is a subject for a debate I won't dive into here, but the point is, he didn't actually make this. Sure, his name is on the box, and quite insultingly on the Police Quest collection boxes as well, erasing all of Jim Walls' contributions to the series, but Police Quest 4 is not his game. Instead, the real designer and writer of this game is one Tammy Dargan, a former producer of the trashy, sensationalist TV series called America's Most Wanted, a show that occupied the same tainted entertainment gene pool of the 90s as Ricky Lake and Jerry Springer. Reportedly, Daryl Gates even told her at one point that the, let's say, inner city dialogue she'd written was too over the top, that they, meaning black people, don't actually talk the way she apparently thought they did. And if Daryl Gates tells you you're being too racist, well, you know something's up. Bizarrely, they still left Tammy's absurdly stereotypical white person writing for black people dialogue in the game to the facepalming embarrassment of everyone else, for reasons I have no intention of speculating on, or maybe Chief Pot to Kettle here just told them after the game was already out. I'm not clear on the timeline, I don't care, it's just an ironic little anecdote. Anyway, Chief Daryl F. Gates is still, rightfully so, remembered these days for being a walking dumpster fire of a man, and speaking ill of the dead is, to me, put entirely on hold when you're indirectly responsible for 63 deaths and over $1 billion in property damage. But if you ask me, the real catastrophe of this project was letting a person whose job used to be piping red-hot sensationalist garbage into people's homes take the reins of designing and writing this god-awful tragedy and somehow get away with it. Anyway, with that bit of unpleasantness out of the way, let's focus instead on why this game is such a depressingly goofy train wreck. As I said, this was the last game in the adventure game series Police Quest. After this game, the series was rebranded into some sort of tactical simulation shit, and no, I'm not going to do any videos about them, so you can stop asking, thank you. Anyway, Police Quest 3 left us with the tragic realization that Sonny and Marie's reproductive systems were, in fact, in working order, and they were going to have
a Baba baby.
And that's the last anyone ever saw of them, because Police Quest 4 is set in an entirely different city and has an entirely different cast of characters, so we'll have to assume that Marie, Sonny, and little Sonny Jr. lived happily ever after until Sonny Jr. started getting picked on at school by little Jeremy Baines, the vengeful orphan son of Jesse Baines, leading to a very tense PTA meeting that resulted in 3 teachers and a superintendent being arrested on the spot for obstructing justice, and also Marie spontaneously falling into another coma. Police Quest 4 swaps out the fictional setting of Lytton, California with the very much non-fictional city of Los Angeles, and Sonny, the gormless cardboard cutout hero, is replaced by this equally gormless personality-deficient plank of wood, Detective John Carey. Carey has no defining traits or characteristics worth speaking of, but he does wear a suit and likes to stand around awkwardly staring off into space with his back unnaturally straight like someone just shoved a broom handle up his ass and he's trying his best not to think about it. He can't even sit down without looking like he's a 10-year-old boy who's been put in timeout, and in every conversation he has, he always looks like he's staring just a few feet above their heads, because if he lowers his head even a few inches, the broom handle might tickle his brain and cause him to have an aneurysm on the spot. Anyway, Johnny Boy here is a homicide detective.
LAPD homicide.
With the Los Angeles Police Department, and that about covers it as far as backstory for our protagonist is concerned. He has no family, no friends outside the police force, and seemingly no home to go back to after a long day either, at least we never see one. I mean shit, at least Sonny had a girlfriend. Granted, all she ever did was get kidnapped, stabbed, held at gunpoint, or otherwise threatened and beleaguered into one perilous situation after another, but at least it was another human being that Sonny, at least ostensibly, had some personal and intimate connection to outside of his job in law enforcement. Detective Carey has no such attachments, but that's probably because one of his favorite pastimes is to go around sexually harassing everyone.
Detective Carey, I view your action as sexual harassment and find your behavior objectionable.
John, I feel close to you too.
Help! Detective Carey has roving hands! Help!
Touching can be a very healing experience. On the other hand, touching can be most destructive.
Hey, I don't even know you, dad nabbit.
Yo, copper. Keep your hands where I can see them.
Find yourself a broad.
Sir, are you all right?
Cool. I like you too.
Oh, darling. Oh, darling.
He's a gentleman.
Anyway, when Carey's not out shoving his fingers in and around unwilling orifices, he's also trying to solve a murder case, specifically the murder of Robert Hickman, fellow LAP detective and close friend of Carey. It should come as no surprise that despite a glaringly obvious conflict of interest, Carey is assigned to the investigation of his buddy's death for no adequately given reason whatsoever. I guess some things never change. You'll recall in the previous games that Sonny was also assigned to his wife kidnapping and attempted murder in Police Quests 2 and 3 respectively, so much for realism, I guess. But what's funny about this is, early in the game, Carey is accosted by a TV reporter who's meant to be this irritating thorn in his side, so much so that the only way out of this ambush interview is to violently shove her out of the way. But if you stick around long enough and let her ask all of her questions, one of them actually is...
Detective Carey, people are talking about your personal relationship with the deceased. It's public record that you attended the academy with Hickman and were assigned patrol status together in the Hollenbeck area. Will your past friendship with the deceased allow you to investigate this case objectively? Do you think the department is correct in assigning you as lead investigator when, in reality, you're investigating the murder of your best friend?
Damn fucking straight, lady! This is a really, really good question, and it speaks absolute fucking volumes that the game just completely sidesteps this issue like it's just a minor inconvenience. Either that, or this was a rare moment of self-awareness on the designer's part, but alas, this is never brought up or acknowledged ever again for the rest of the game, so I suppose we're just gonna have to go along with it. But if you ask me, this reporter is the real hero of this game. Fuck Carey, fuck everyone else, give this girl her own game. Anyway, off our immaculately dressed dimwit detective fucks in search of Bobby Boy's killer. As the story progresses, the killer racks up an additional 6 victims before finally being brought to some kind of justice. Yeah, you know, let's just start from the ending and work our way backwards. The killer turns out to be this dude, Mitchell Thurman, a stuttering antisocial movie theater owner who likes to dress up in women's clothes and mutilate his victims before poisoning them to death. Now, I know what you're thinking. On the surface, this seems extraordinarily trite, not to mention a bit offensive, and it is, on both counts. But Mitchell isn't identified as transgender specifically. His cross-dressing is more of a pathological compulsion than a gender thing, but it's still just used by the game as a cheap shorthand for oddness and deviancy, something something any respectable citizen would never in their wildest dreams do, or, more succinctly,
he's a fucking weirdo transvestite.
Yeah, now, not to defend this face-palming choice on behalf of the designers, but in some minuscule fairness, the dude in a dress who also murders people trope goes back a long way, from real-life serial killers like Ed Gein to movie killers like Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs and Norman Bates in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. And indeed, Mitchell here seems to be very much inspired by Norman Bates, in that the fancy red dress he wears when he carries out his murders belongs to his deceased mother, a compulsion that apparently developed because as a child he witnessed his mother being murdered by his abusive father, and yeah, okay, it's still pretty flimsy to say the least, not to mention a bit unoriginal. From a plot standpoint, what the game never bothers explaining is why he decided to take up murdering people to cope with his childhood trauma, or why he decides to murder these people in particular. I mean, 2 of his victims are police detectives, and a 3rd is his own caseworker from social services, so he's not exactly flying under the radar, so to speak. The other 3 on his hit list of body counts are just complete randos who we can only assume simply stumbled into his way. There's some half-baked justification about how he's being accused of mistreating his dog, so he's out cutting off his victims' limbs to feed to his dog. But come on, even if this whole killing spree is just an excuse to avoid spending his money on pet food, it still doesn't explain why he also ties up his victims and burns them with cigarettes and glues their eyes and mouths shut before injecting them with a poison that essentially makes their guts explode. The game doesn't really expect you to look any deeper than, this guy's a weirdo who likes to dress up as his mother and kill people for no real reason other than he's insane, and that apparently justifies setting fire to the guy and then just stand around and watch him burn to death. And get a medal for it. Right, okay.
He's a gentleman.
Anyway, the path up to this final confrontation is dumbfounding to say the least. Most of Carrie's investigation consists of talking to people and filling out paperwork in equal measure. The previous game's focus on following proper police procedure is toned way down. In fact, as far as I can gather, your only punishment for not doing things exactly by the book are to either get chewed out for a bit or straight up killed on the spot. In fact, at one point, the solution to a puzzle is to actively circumvent proper procedure and have a coroner do an examination of a bone you found in the park, instead of handing it in as evidence and having the labs at the department run tests on it, because that would just take too long. Never mind that this would most likely make it inadmissible as evidence, but Carrie's justification for doing so is that he's been hounded by the chief, the mayor, and just about everyone else in the greater city of Los Angeles to put a lid on this case, when, in reality, Carrie's almost completely on his own throughout the entire game and only talks to people when he feels like it. Maybe he's just hearing voices in his head or something. Anyway, as far as the evidence gathering part of this investigation goes, you can't really fuck this up because the condescending narrator will never let you, and you can't accidentally miss something and find yourself dead-ended because either the stuff you're missing is so dead crucial that the game just won't proceed until you find it, or it's so non-essential that it's just there for points. A really glaring example of this happens right at the start when you investigate the crime scene of your buddy Bob. In a dumpster nearby is another corpse of a 7-year-old child because, you know,
these streets are mean.
But if you miss this one, you just get a bit of a stern talking to from the chief, and then the game carries on as if nothing happened. And appallingly, this whole business with the dead child turns out to be a complete red herring that adds absolutely nothing to the main mystery of the game. The whole point of it seems to boil down to making sure Bobby Boy here wasn't the one who put the bullets in the boy, so after collecting slugs from the wall where the youngster was gunned down, we hand them in and run tests on them to make sure they don't match the bullets in Bobby's gun. This is before the voices in Carrie's head apparently started telling him he was taking too long. And when the test comes back and definitively show that Bobby didn't kill the kid, everybody just breathes a sigh of relief and go on with their lives. The kid's never even mentioned again after this point. Not to mention that the kid's killer is seen loitering right at the fucking crime scene and then later uses a payphone that you later discover doesn't actually work, and lumbering around the streets of South Central within earshot, both the grieving mother and an informant, who is incidentally gunned down by this same person, fingers him as the killer, but after the shootout, that's the last we ever hear about it, as if this wasn't a priority for some reason.
He's a gentleman.
Anyway, I'm not going to go over the entire game, because for the most part you're just pissing around in circles following leads at an agonizingly laborious pace until the game eventually gets just as bored as you are and boots you off to the endgame. I will go through the entire endgame scenario though, because it sums up quite perfectly just how fucking absurd this game is. First of all, the way you eventually track down the killer is by complete fucking coincidence. There's a dog sitting around one of the crime scenes, the one where Carrie discovers the human bone that the crime scene investigators apparently didn't bother tagging with them. This is a common reoccurrence with these people, by the way, as another of Carrie's leads is this newspaper clipping found in a vehicle that was used to dump 2 of the bodies, which is also processed by SID, or the Scientific Investigative Division, is basically the same as CSI, which means that these people are just absolutely fucking useless at their jobs. Anyway, the newspaper clipping points to a rundown art house movie theater called The Third Eye. Yes, the same movie theater I just mentioned before, the one that's owned by the killer, although Carrie doesn't know that yet, and in fact remains blissfully unaware of that until about 10 minutes before the end credits roll. So, at this point, you've already had a chat with Mitchell the killer, and he does mention that he has a dog, but you have no proof that he's the killer at this point other than the ominous soundtrack kinda giving it away. And at any rate, it's also more than a bit circumstantial because you've no reason to suspect that this dog is his, although it is the only dog in the game and it is hanging around one of the crime scenes, but still a bit of a stretch. So, for absolutely no reason whatsoever, Carrie decides to swing a rope at the dog, catching it by the neck like he's some sort of galloping cowboy rounding up a herd of bulls and getting dragged through the park. And after that little comedy stunt, the dog finally drops him off at an alley that conveniently leads into the back room of the killer's residence and the end of the game. I'll get back to this final stretch of the game later, but for now, let's just back this up a bit. As I said, from a plot standpoint, Carrie really has no reason to believe this dog is in any way connected to the case other than the flimsiest of hunches. I mean, okay, if we're being charitable about this, let's follow the breadcrumb trail that might lead you to suspect that this guy's the killer and that this dog is somehow connected to the case. One of the dude's victims is a social worker, and her last known whereabouts was a home visit to this guy because he had the Monday blues. Again, it's circumstantial, but it's a connection at least, and a fairly promising lead compared to the rest of this game's parade of non-starters and brick walls. And the dude has a dog, and the dog is hanging around a crime scene, and not just any crime scene, but the crime scene where the social worker's body was found. But even with all that, it's still just a dog. The guy doesn't give you a description of the dog. You have no reason to believe it's his dog other than the fact that it's hanging around a crime scene. Hell, the dog's even described by the other officers as a stray dog, so why would you assume the dog is in any way related to the case other than the fact that this weirdo with a stutter says he owns a dog and that the dog is hanging out near a shallow grave that you just dug a nice, juicy, comparatively fresh bone out of? Wouldn't any dog like to hang around a place like that? And even if you were to make the frankly extraordinary leap of logic that this dog belongs to the killer and that it might be able to somehow clue you in as to his whereabouts, wouldn't it make more sense to call a dog catcher and have them snare the dog and give it a once-over under more controlled circumstances? Like, you could have stuck the dog in the pound, have the suspect come down to identify the dog, and then put two and two together. I mean, what part of throwing a rope around a random dog's neck and getting dragged all over town screams proper police procedure to you?
He certainly has added realism and thoughtfulness and accuracy to this game.
As the player, you've no reason to start lassoing random canines other than because the game lets you, because this puzzle isn't signposted in the slightest. And let's take an even further step back here, because the actual mechanics of this dog puzzle are absolutely ass backwards. The dog won't even show up at the park unless you have all the items you need to progress, including the rope you need to catch the dog with. Now, this rope itself is one of the biggest dick moves this game can pull on you because it's located in this alley. Now, you've already been to this alley several times, but the rope doesn't show up here until the very end of the game. At this point, you have no reason to go back here and check because this alley is old news. It's been ages since you were last here. This whole downtown section was only relevant back when we were still momentarily distracted by a 7-year-old boy's bullet-ridden corpse, and at this point in the game, that whole business is a distant memory, and there's no current lead that suggests or indicates or encourages that you're supposed to go back here and check now, so you really have to just be completely out of ideas and walk around checking every location out of sheer boredom. And even then, the rope itself blends in with the background to the point where it just looks like it's part of the background itself. I even restored a save game from earlier thinking I'd somehow missed it the first time I went to the alley and it had been right under my nose the entire time, but no, this rope doesn't show up until right at the end of the game, and the dog won't show up until you have the rope, so the puzzle is all backwards. The setup for the puzzle, a dog hanging around a crime scene that you might, under some flimsy pretense, need to capture, won't show up until you already have the item you need to do it with, an item that you, in the context of the story, have no need to pick up and carry with you because there's nothing in the game world that you'd think to use the rope on before the dog shows up. And then, once you actually do, the game goes into full-on Laurel and Hardy goofball mode and has the dog drag Detective Carrie all around the park until it leads you to the killer's residence. I mean, for a game that goes out of its way to put on a gritty facade of realism, describing this part as a tonal shift is like describing the Grand Canyon as a fucking hole in the ground. And then it's right back to the so-called gritty realism with the spooky-ass music once you get there. I guess another clue that this Mitchell guy might be the killer is that after you ask him about the social worker, who at this point is very much dead, he has a bit of a meltdown and then he offers you a cup of tea on the house. Now, again, he's not really giving off killer vibes at this point. In fact, he seems genuinely distraught about her death, but if you were suspecting him at this time, you would, in fact, be 10 steps ahead of LAPD's finest here, because Carrie senses absolutely nothing out of the ordinary and just chugs that shit without a second thought. And of course, the tea is drugged, so Carrie falls asleep at the movie theater, ready and primed to become the latest slice and dice victim, but for some reason, Mitchell decides not to take advantage of this obvious opportunity that just fell into his lap, and instead sends Carrie off on his merry way. Now, unlike our pea-brain protagonist, this guy has every reason to believe he's about 10 seconds away from getting rumbled, and he certainly had no qualms about going to town on any other hapless sap that got in his way. He doesn't seem particularly discriminating about his choice of victims, and he doesn't seem particularly worried about what kind of suspicion his killings arouse, because Lord knows he hasn't exactly been displaying any sort of subtlety or clever foresight with his track record. He's already got 2 detectives and a government official under his belt, and his MO involves dragging his victims off to other locations when he's done with them, in stilettos, I might add. So he has every opportunity and good reason to get rid of this pesky dumbass detective who's obviously so hot on his fashionably pointy heels at this point in the story that his feet are about to catch fire. Foreshadowing, I guess. Anyway, this baffling act of mercy is what allows Carrie to commit this act of bewildering dog snatching and thereby access to the killer's apartment atop the movie theater, where he discovers a severed head in the fridge. Now, as I mentioned, my man Mitchell here has a penchant for severing limbs and other body parts from his victims after he's done torturing and poisoning them, including but not limited to a forearm, a foot, and a pair of ears, and as I said, it's heavily implied that he does this so he can feed them to his dog, though that does beg the question why he would remove one of his victims' teeth. That seems like it would be murder in anyone's digestion. But anyway, going from an arm and a foot, and in the case of Bobby Boy, a measly index finger, to a full-on severed head seems like a bit of a leap in severity if you ask me. Also, it sounds like that would take a lot more work to carve up for a dog to chew on. I mean, I'm not in the business of giving culinary advice to rampant mass murderers, but why not just stick to arms and legs if you're just gonna hug your fleshy trophies at your dog anyway? I can only assume, therefore, that much like the dead kid in the dumpster, this grisly sight was included for the sole purpose of shock value. It doesn't exactly fit in with the killer's established intentions, however vaguely defined those are to begin with, and it just comes across as another tick box on this game's "oh my god, the dude's so insane" checklist.
He's a gentleman.
But once again, I have to backtrack here, because to get this far, you first have to contend with what is hands down the game's most baffling inventory puzzle. Here's the creepy stairwell leading into the killer's kitchen of culinary creepiness. If you try to just walk up the stairs, you'll instantly get mauled by the dog. I'm sure he's a good boy deep down. Anyway, obviously you have to do something in the stairwell to make the dog go away. Never mind that this puzzle is predicated on the player having to die in order to even realize there is a puzzle to contend with here, because there's no clue at this location that you're about to become the next main course on this mangy mutt's menu. You'd think there'd at least be an auditory clue, maybe even a text box upon entering or when looking at the door that says, "You hear the sound of growling coming from the other side of the door," but nope, nothing. But putting that aside and pretending that we somehow clairvoyantly know that there's a vicious, ravenously hungry dog on the other side, what might we use to ensure our safe passage up the stairs? Maybe chuck a bone or a juicy steak through the slightly ajar door. Maybe whistle for the dog to come downstairs and somehow trap it in the basement we just came through. Or shit, if we're reaching for the stars, how about lobbing a firecracker or a small incendiary device up the stairs to scare it away? I mean, sure, it would most likely alert the killer to your presence, but it would still make a lot more sense than the actual solution to this puzzle. The solution, and I swear this is true, is to procure a drumstick from this record store, then glue it to this windshield mirror, which then produces a 180-degree mirror that you can then use to check around the door, at which point the dog magically fucking vanishes. No kidding, suddenly the coast is clear. No dog.
What?
And once again, let's just walk this puzzle back a bit because it gets even more ridiculous. The windshield mirror? Some dude just randomly hacks it off your patrol car, which Carrie for some reason doesn't even bat an eye at, even though he just caught the dude red-handed and the dude just slinks away at a casual pace. Instead of pulling his shield or his gun, or at least yelling at him for vandalizing his wheels, Carrie just decides to let him go, walks over, picks up the severed mirror, and sticks it in his pocket.
What?
Moving on. The drumstick is obtained by picking up a cassette tape at the office of Luella Parker, the dead social worker, and handing it back to the record store where it was purchased. Now, instead of making inquiries into its suspicious existence, given that it was found at the office of a person who reportedly listens to classical music rather than hip-hop, meaning that it's quite clearly not hers, Carrie instead just swaps it out for a drumstick.
What?
The glue at least has some cursory purpose in terms of the story, given that the killer likes to glue his victims' eyes and mouths shut, so at least Carrie has a reason to pick up this glue from a nearby convenience store to see if it matches the glue from the victims, which it does, but it turns out it's also an incredibly generic brand of glue, so it's useless as evidence, but Carrie decides to carry it around with him throughout the entire game anyway.
What?
And of course, it bears mentioning that, like the previous shit with the dog and the rope, this puzzle is also completely ass-backwards, meaning you have no idea why these items are important or why they may come in handy later. You don't encounter the Stairwell of Doom until the very late endgame, when there's no way to go back and acquire items you may have missed, so once again, the traditional way of setting up a puzzle, by showing you the obstacle first and then having you go off and find items that you need to get past said obstacle, is flipped completely on its head, meaning you have no goddamn reason to swap this tape for a drumstick or haul this glue and windshield mirror around you wherever you go, other than the fact that it's clearly what the game expects you to do. Okay, back to the endgame. Turns out the dog didn't just magically vanish into the ether, but is now guarding this hallway instead. Rather than viciously mauling you on sight like it would have done if you didn't do your little mirror on a stick trick earlier, now he just sits there and growls at you if you get too close, but he never actually attacks you. So, how do we get this dog to take a hike? Well, he must be hungry, right? Let's see. Stale pretzels won't do. This candy bar won't do. We could slice off a lump of this guy's face and serve that up, since the dog obviously seems to have an appetite for human flesh, but that hardly seems professional for an upstanding officer of the law like Carrie. Oh, I know. How about we drug his ass? Yeah, I don't know how you go about shoving a whole bottle of sleeping pills down the throat of a vicious attack dog, but Carrie somehow manages to do so.
He's a gentleman.
And that finally gives us free run at the apartment. We make our way through a trapdoor in the bedroom closet, which leads down to the movie theater, where Mitchell has a fresh candidate passed out and ready to go in one of the aisle seats. But apparently he needed to go take a piss or something, or do a quick costume change, because for the moment, he's nowhere to be seen. Carrie tries to wake up the woman by performing one of the weirdest hand gestures of all time. But no dice, so Carrie just fucking leaves her there. After a fruitless trip to the front lobby, which you can't exit from because, you know, going out to get some help or radio for backup would make too much sense, and the game instead just insisted you stay here and continue your investigation, Carrie returns to the theater to see his killer carrying his victim off like a sack of potatoes to a backstage area and locking the door behind him. How the hell he managed to get past us, or if he was hiding somewhere in the seat rows or whatever, is anybody's guess, but it doesn't exactly speak highly of our dumb fuck hero's observational skills, if you ask me. Anyway, giving this door a swift kick or shooting off the lock somehow doesn't seem like the appropriate course of action despite someone's life clearly being at risk, and going out and calling for backup is still for some reason not an option, so instead Carrie has to go find a key to proceed, and the key is somewhere in this lobby. Do you see it? I'll give you 10 seconds on the clock to spot it. Go! Actually, screw it, it's here. It's in this glob of blurred pixels, which turns out to be a can of cola. The can is empty, but if you rattle it around into your inventory, a skeleton key falls out. Hey, that's good. I know what that is from watching Beetlejuice as a kid.
That's a skeleton key. That key will open any door in the house.
Except for this one. This skeleton key, which the game even goes out of its way to identify in the message as a skeleton key, doesn't unlock this door.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
Instead, you have to unlock this other door, which leads to God knows where, and where the killer has conveniently teleported so he can slam dunk Carrie's stupid head in and leave him on the floor of his living room to deal with later. What? Wait, deal with later? Why not just off him right now? The jig is obviously up for him. He knows damn well Carrie is a cop. The guy was grilling him just half an hour ago. I suppose he thinks robbing him of all his possessions and leaving Cujo here in charge will buy him the time he needs to finish up his current project, but honestly, what's the point? Why not just put a tarp down and jab a steak knife in Carrie's jugular? Maybe it's an entree for the dog before the main course in the bedroom. No. Obviously, the sensible thing to do is to just leave him there and give him ample time to come up with an escape plan. That escape plan, incidentally, involves murdering his dog. I'm fucking serious. You chuck his ball toy out the window and the dog just jumps right at it.
Bunny! Bubba!
Yeah, I thought the window was closed. It's really hard to tell with these incredibly mushy pixelated graphics, and I certainly wouldn't think that this absolute unit of a canine could even fit through these bars, let alone be stupid enough to actually jump through them, but fuck it, why start making any sense now? Oh, and if you think the dog might be alright, I mean, it's only a second story window, maybe he's fine. Nope, we just killed an innocent dog.
He's a gentleman.
I mean, granted, Poochie here has eaten a full-course banquet worth of evidence over the past few days, but come on, it's not like he murdered any of those people, and I'm pretty sure it would be a hard sell to paint him as a willing accomplice in front of a jury of his peers. That sketchy Rottweiler bitch always moves to vote guilty. I don't know what her problem is. Anyway, since we now have been deprived of any means of self-defense, we'll have to see what we can scrounge up in Mitchell's apartment. There's a can of hairspray in the bathroom, so I guess if the killer comes back to finally finish us off, we can at least look our best. Let's check to see how Mr. Head is doing. Oh, what's this? It's our lighter. Yeah, we've been carrying around a lighter that we stole off a stripper for half of the game. Not joking. Oh. Those were simpler times. Oh, hi, YouTube demonetization. Don't worry, I'm pretty sure she's got tassels on her nip-nips. It's fine. Anyway, at least we got that little souvenir back. It would have been nice if it was one of the other 4 million items we were carrying. Fuck knows what happened to my stale pretzels. I could really use a snack right about now, but okay, lighter it is. Lighter plus can of hairspray equals makeshift flamethrower. And as Carrie barges in on Mitchell poking around the face and crotch of his latest victim, seriously, what is he doing? Mitchell turns to Carrie, seemingly ready to throw a Hadouken, which we counter with a swift burst of fuego in his direction. Evidently, Mitchell must have fucking doused himself liberally with this shit from head to toe, because he immediately goes up like a Roman candle, and Carrie just stands there for a very, very long time. You know, I think you got him, Carrie. You can put him out now. He seems pretty incapacitated to me. Carrie? Hello? No? I swear I didn't edit this. He just stands there at attention for what seems like minutes. I timed this. 18 seconds pass from the time Carrie fireballs this dude until the screen fades, and it's safe to assume he doesn't exactly rush in to put him out after the game mercifully cuts away. Fucking hell, Carrie.
He's a gentleman.
And so ends Police Quest 4, a game that went from being 90% mind-numbing tedium to full-on batshit insane in the last 10 minutes of its stupendously bewildering playtime. Now, I know what you're thinking. What was the point of any of this? Fuck if I know. The killer has no motivations other than being cartoonishly insane. The investigation goes about as fast as a chronically depressed slug on Valium until it suddenly, without warning, hits the fast-forward button and plunges you into the sheer gobsmacking madness that is the endgame. The purported realism of having to follow proper police procedure or face the consequences is in actuality an entirely optional footnote, and the main protagonist is such a wet fart of a non-person that he may as well have been a stick figure. But you all knew that, right? You didn't come here expecting me to suddenly do a 180 and praise this game as the pinnacle of Sierra's foray to chronicling the harsh realities of law enforcement. This game is notorious, not just because of the involvement of its disastrously odious poster boy Mr. Chief Daryl F. Gates.
He's a gentleman.
Oh, fuck you. But even if you remove that taint of shit-steered veneer, it's also just an absolute slog of a game that tries to mask its unrepentant boredom with moments of gratuitous shock moments, like sticking a bullet-ridden adolescent in the dumpster and then ignoring his ass once your dead cop buddy is cleared of any involvement, or having a killer whose predilection towards cross-dressing is used exclusively to paint him as a sick deviant. This game can eat my ass and fuck right off. I am so glad I never have to play this ever again. I knew that going into this game that it was a bag of shit, and so did all of you who have been watching my series of retrospectives on these games, so I know none of you are the least bit surprised at anything I've just said in this video. But so now hopefully we can just put this fucking nightmare behind us and move on to better things. Oh, but there is one thing I want to mention here at the end that has nothing to do with how fucking stupid this game is. The graphics. Now, as you can see, all of it is digitized real-life photography, everything from the character sprites to the backgrounds, which were photographed on location in Los Angeles. And while Sierra may have thought this was impressive on a technological level, the truth is this is just a fucking eyesore. The backgrounds are mushy and barely legible because the game runs in a standard VGA resolution of 320 by 200. I know what you're gonna say, trust me, I'll get to that. The characters all look stilted and inhuman, especially if you crank the speed slider up and make Carrie zip around the place like the broomstick up his ass started vibrating like a Black & Decker, and most of it just ends up looking unintentionally comical. I mean, what the hell is your partner the precinct doing here? He's supposed to be filing your report, but it looks like he's just flapping random papers around his desk or doing some sort of fucked up magic trick. And I still can't get over how stiff Carrie looks when he's sitting down. The woman he's talking to right now is the fucking widow of the deceased detective who was also Carrie's best friend, but he looks like a little boy who was just sent to the principal's office. And don't get me started on the fucking jank of this game. This shootout where you're meant to take down a gunman firing from the windows is just absurd. In the floppy version, you have to watch Carrie's sprite to see where you're aiming because the game doesn't give you a fucking crosshair to aim with. Moving the mouse around just nudges his sprite slightly, which is supposed to correspond to which window you're aiming at, but the sensitivity is all over the place, so you have to just barely move an inch before Carrie decides to aim somewhere completely off in the distance. This shit is just trial and error at its worst. And sure, in the CD version they actually give you a crosshair, but they made it fucking black on a dark background. Imagine playing this on a CRT monitor back in 1993. You'd give yourself fucking cataracts before getting past this sequence. Oh, and don't even bother going to the shooting range. The game makes this big deal about how Carey has to take his qualifying marksman's test, and you'd think this would be an instant game over if you failed, but no, this whole thing is entirely optional. There are no repercussions for just skipping this bullshit entirely. Oh, and the exit hotspots inside the police station are jank as fuck too. You take the elevator anywhere and have to wait an ungodly amount of time before it arrives and Carey steps off. If you try to leave the screen before the elevator doors close and the sound effect and animation of the elevator moving away is finished, the exit hotspots just don't work at all. So Carey just jitters around in a fucking circle until the elevator decides in its divine mercy that you're allowed to leave the screen. And every time you want to go back to the police station, you have to go through a number of tedious steps just to get to your office. First, you have to open your inventory and click this ID badge on Carey, otherwise this fuckhead at the front desk won't let you in. Carey automatically removes this badge every time you leave the building, so you have to reattach this fucking badge every fucking time you walk inside. Then, you have to go to the next screen and call the elevator. This takes forever. You then have to press the button for the third floor, which is where your office is, and wait for the aforementioned animation of the door closing, which takes forever, and wait for the elevator to lumber its way up to the third floor, which also takes forever. Finally, you get off on the third floor, wait for the elevator to fuck off so it'll activate the fucking exit hotspots, then walk down this completely extraneous hallway screen that's literally just 3 exits, 2 of them leading back to the fucking devil elevator, and finally, you arrive at your office. And when you're ready to leave, you have to do all of this again in reverse, minus the ID badge, which is the part that takes the least amount of time, every single goddamn fucking time. And lastly, there's the CD version. The game came out on floppy disks in 1993, and an astonishing 3 years later in 1996 on CD-ROM. Now, whatever the fuck took them this long, I have no idea, but it certainly wasn't updating the graphics. Sure, the game now claims it supports high-res SVGA graphics and a resolution of 640 by 480, but this is just a crock of horseshit. All the backgrounds, save for a few establishing shots of buildings, and bizarrely, this close-up of surgical tools at the coroner's office, which is entirely superfluous since you can't interact with any of the items, are still in low resolution pixelated 320 by 200 VGA resolution. They've just been upscaled to 640 by 480, but with no attempt to clean them up or make them any less messy and illegible. The only things in the CD-ROM version that actually makes any use of the doubled amount of available pixels are the UI and some of the character sprites. Carey's sprite is now high-res, technically, but it's still incredibly garbled to the point where he still has no identifiable facial features, except now when he recedes into the distance, his scaling is SVGA while the backgrounds are still VGA, so it looks even more jarring and unrealistic. And this isn't the only game in Sierra's catalog that does this. This game came out in this weird time when Sierra were, for some reason, apparently still unsure if this SVGA thing would ever take off, so they just repackaged their games on CD with the disc version's graphics and only updated the sprites and other little bits to SVGA. Surely the art assets must have existed in high resolution from when they were made. I mean, Gabriel Knight, King's Quest 6, and Freddy Farkas all use hand-painted backgrounds. Why not just rescan them and put them in the game? It's not like it would have been an extra massive effort. They already had to rebuild all the scenes and realign all the hotspots because the game's already run in a 640 by 480 resolution now. And Lord fucking knows, no game would have benefited more from this than Police Quest 4, which is just an eye-searing mess of pixel soup to look at. And what's even more infuriating is that they did include some of the higher resolution images they photographed, so we know the higher resolution photographs did exist, which means updating Police Quest 4's graphics to true SVGA would have taken the least amount of effort. You wouldn't even have to rescan any artwork because it's all digital photography to begin with. But none of the ones they did include are interactive. All the main scenes of the game are still pixel soup. Get fucked. Wow, this was fun. Now, you'd think I was finally done with my multi-episodic bitching about the Police Quest series, given that I said at the start of this video that I'm not going to dive into the SWAT games that came after Police Quest 4, but we still have the bastard red-headed stepchild of the series to scrutinize, and that game is Blue Force, a spiritual sequel of sorts developed by Tsunami Games, a company formed in 1991 by former Sierra employees under the leadership of Jim Walls, the original designer of Police Quest 1, 2, and 3. And from what I hear, it's still bad, but it's going to feel like a breath of fresh air compared to the stale fart smell of this game. We'll see if that's true in due time, but for now, take care, and I'll see you around the Chrono Stream. Bye! Oh, and because you stuck around until the end of the game, I forgot to script this part. If you go into the resource files of Police Quest 4 and have a look around, there are some really weird shit in here. For some reason, there's like 11 shots of space, just random space shit. Here's Jupiter, here's Io, here's Saturn, and then there's this screen of Mechmethius from Space Quest 4. Now, they were probably used as placeholders for when the team were putting together the CD version or whatever, but it's still pretty fucking weird. But also, there are these two alternate angles, is what they're called, angles of Yo Money's estate. Now, I completely skipped over Yo Money in this video. He's the rapper guy that you go and interrogate because you find one of Mitchell's shoes in his garden, and also because one of the bodies of the detectives is dumped unceremoniously in his garden. But anyway, yeah. So Yo Money's estate basically has like an exterior shot, a shot of the driveway, and then the living room. Oh, and there's this shot of you facing off with his security guard, like right at the front door. But anyway, there are two extra shots that I'm showing here and talking over way too long, of like an alternate shot of the hallway and an alternate shot of the living room, and also an alternate shot of the driveway. Now, in the original game, if you have a look at the Lamborghini that's parked out front, the game says, oh, maybe you should get closer if you want a good look at it, but you can't, because if you try to walk to the right from this like front door view, you just hear the growling of a dog, and Carrie just goes, fuck that, I'm out. But apparently there was actually a way to get there. I don't know why they cut that out. Maybe they finally realized that was an extraneous scene in the game, as opposed to this lovely hallway in the fucking police station. God, why is it even here? Anyway, just a bit of resource fun, I guess. Which it's always fun to go poking around the resource files of these games. So I just thought I'd share that. And the video is going to end now. Goodbye. Moving on. The drumstick is obtained by picking up a cassette tape at the office of Luella Parker, the dead social worker, and handing it back to the record store where it was purchased. Now, instead of making inquiries, why can't I say fucking inquiries? And of course it bears... that's a weird way to start a sentence. Okay, back to the endgame. Turns out the dog didn't just magically vanish into the ether, but it's now guarding. Hello, I am guarding this hallway. And that finally gives us free run of the apartment. We make our way through a trapdoor in the bedroom closet, which leads down... It's so hard to say these freaking conscious. And that finally gives us free run of the apartment. We make our through... What the fuck? Anyway, giving this door a swift kick or shooting off the lock somehow doesn't seem to be the appropriate course of action, despite someone's life literally being a disc. Lighter can plus hairspray equals makeshift flamethrower. A flamethrower is the best arsenal you'll have. The backgrounds are mushy and barely legible because the game runs in standard VGA resolution of 20 by 200. There are no repercussions for skipping this bullshit entirely. What the fuck is a repercussion? There are no repercussions, goddammit! The only thing in the CD-ROM version that actually makes any use of the doubled amount of available pixels... Kinda tripping over my balls there.